Welcome to another episode of OpenIntro, the podcast where we get under the bonnet of our leaders and really get an understanding of who they are and why they do what they do. So my name is Joel Blake. I'm the host of the show, and it's a fantastic opportunity to speak with someone who, I'm not going to steal his thunder, to be honest with you. I'll let him explain exactly what he does, but Adib, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Obviously you've got to talk a little bit about what you do, but one of the things I found fascinating about your journey is your relentlessness and your sense of drive, and I'm sure that will come out in our podcast today. But I'd like to start by just asking, why do you do what you do?
That's not sure how many times I've thought about that exact question in my life. I think to understand why I do what I'm doing today, I probably have to give you a little bit of a glimpse into how I came to this point, where I started, and I started really young. I was always used to pushing the kind of boundaries. The youngest ever X was really common for me, right from probably until about 25, 26, 27. And then I started being just being called good at my job rather than being people being impressed by the age that I achieved it. So I started my career in the 90s as an engineer, specifically a hardware engineer. And I got a lot of, this is the youngest guy in the company. I was probably 15, 16 when I was working in a full-time job at 16, building networks and PCs. At the same time, I also started university when I was 16 as well. And my computer science degree was then. So I was the youngest person in the university as well. So I've always had this kind of label of the youngest. There was probably more examples in my childhood as well. And then I stayed in engineering until 2000. And then I made the probably poor decision to switch into management. And operations became my thing. I say the poor decision simply because at the time I wouldn't have known that engineering and software development was going to become what it is today. I mean, I probably could have had a guess at it, but it started looking very commoditized to me. Everyone and their dog was now working in networking and hardware, and I just thought, I'm not getting the same value I was previously. So I went into management, and I was specifically in hospitality management, and I did a lot of stuff around hotels, restaurants. Did that for quite some time, almost a decade. Then I went into banking, again by complete chance, to be honest. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and a new company was opening, and they offered me a position, and I just made a switch into that industry, and I was really good at it. I did very well, and I did it for a few years. It didn't stay with me for long. I think the tech space was calling me back, and a few years later, I got offered a job as the COO for a logistics and delivery tech company. And then I proceeded to do another sort of almost a decade of COO for specifically tech startups. A lot of the companies I've worked on prior to 2018 were startups. Even prior, so in the 20, 30 years, a lot of them were startups, but they were startups in a variety of different spaces. And not when someone says startup, they usually think of it in the modern venture capital sense. So I was doing that until 2018, and then I decided that I wanted to do something more broad. I wanted to approach the market in a grander sense, rather than working on one company at a time. Could I find a way to scale myself? So I thought an advisory business would be the right thing to do. So I created an advisory firm. It lasted for a year. It was going okay. And then I realized that advice wasn't enough, and execution was way more important to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's my operations side. I was sitting down with CEOs and I was saying to them, okay, here's the problem. You've got a branding issue. We need to work on your positioning, and here's the outcome that you should be looking for. And then I'd set them off on a task, or I'd be sitting down with them talking about their project management frameworks for their development team, and saying, the reason you're not getting the velocity you want on software development is because you're managing this badly, or you're not thinking about your priorities properly. And then I'd lead them to try and solve it, and then I'd come back a few weeks later and nothing was done, and I was just getting frustrated. Yeah. When I was a COO, it was different. I would sit down and have those same conversations, but then I would go and execute. But when I was an advisor to the CEO, I was relying on them to do it. And CEOs are not great at executing. And it's not, a part of it is the stereotype of they're visionary people, they're creative ideas people, and they're not execution people. There is an aspect of that, and that's why the COO role exists to a certain extent. But I also looked at it from the startup and scale up perspective, and these companies typically are resource constrained and also skill constrained. So I was giving the advice, but there was no one in the team that could actually spare the time to go and do it, or had the skill set to do it. And one of the two, or maybe both, was the problem. So my company, Bamboo Orchard, sort of developed out into something more. I said, right, it's not just going to be me giving advice anymore. It's going to be an innovation studio that's actually going to do all of the strategic part and the execution part. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. So up until that point, I probably had worked, I think about 16, 17 companies that I'd helped build up until 2018. And since 2018 till now, we're at 85 companies, I think. Yeah, 85. That's just in the last 6 years. So when you add on the 17 before that, I'm now crossing the 100 mark, I think. And that's a recent. We're launching a new company every 3 months, and we're probably working on another 8 or 9 scale-ups in a year on top of those new startups as well. So I am constantly seeing new and quite often the same problems over and over again at that scale-up and startup section. What's interesting though is that it's consistent. It's consistent. It doesn't matter what industry. It doesn't matter whether you're B2B or B2C. It doesn't matter if you have 10 employees or 100 employees. There are probably 80% of problems which are the same across all these businesses. Right? It really doesn't matter what industry they're in. Which actually is something my father said to me when I was young. My father had been a bank manager in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then became very entrepreneurial, built a lot of different businesses, predominantly in retail. And when I was in my sort of late teens, he said to me, go and get more work experience. This is when I was leaving the engineering space and going into something else. He said, go and get more work experience. And I said, well, in what? He said, it doesn't matter. All businesses are the same. It's just money in and money out. And you just got to make sure one is higher than the other, right? They will all face similar problems.
Wise
I was like, right, okay, yeah, I'll go and do that then.
I think what's really interesting, and thanks for sharing, and I think, we'll dive into Bamboo Orchard shortly, but I think what immediately absolutely jumps out is that there's a certain level of standard and excellence you expect in everything that you do, and that seems to have driven you from a very young age and driven the way in which you operate with others. How have you found the frustration, I guess, you see, you alluded to with advisors, CEOs, where, you're setting that framework of excellence in the way that they should do things and they're not seeing it done. How have you dealt with that frustration in an advisory role, but also as the leader yourself in your own organization?
It's difficult. There are certain types of leaders that are much easier to work with. Everyone will have the same set of problems, but how they approach the problem will be dependent on their sort of personality type, if you like. And I'm not a big believer in these very narrow buckets of things like Myers-Briggs and the other personality typings. But I do think they're useful. It's sometimes useful to put people into buckets, right? And I generally put founders into two categories, right? They will either be led by control, or they will be led by outcomes, right? Outcomes, rewards, revenue, typically is what we're talking about, right? So depending on which type that I'm dealing with, I have a slightly different experience, and I manage them slightly differently. As a general rule, the easier founders to deal with are the ones that are led by outcome and led by reward. And the harder ones are the ones that are led by control. To explain what that means, a very famous control-led founder is Steve Jobs. Is a very famous control-led founder. I will build the product in the way that I imagine it, and I don't need any input from the outside world. It will be exactly where I want it to be. Right, that's what I'm building. Henry Ford, is it Henry Ford? Yeah, said something similar in terms of, if I ask my customers what I want, they would ask for a faster horse. That idea, right? Those are control-led founders. So you can be very successful like that. A reward-led founder is somebody more like Bill Gates. The product will be malleable. The business service will be malleable, and we will look at the market and follow the trend of the market and try and optimize our outcomes in terms of revenue. We're trying to optimize regardless of what the company needs to do. We're going to do it, right? We're not going to be precious about, well, this is what we've always done, this is what we're going to do, or this is what we believe. It's about being more malleable than that. And so these kind of founders are generally easier to deal with, because when you come and present an alternative outcome, they are open to listening to, well, okay, maybe I have to pivot my business. Maybe I have to park this product or this project because there's a better project that will give me a better outcome, right? They don't get too attached to it. But the ones that are attached, they can generate these really amazing outcomes as long as the original idea is a good one, right? But then they can be really driven to get these great outcomes. So generally, I will only work with control-led founders when they are absolutely exceptional. Exceptional people, because they have to really, really know, right? They have to really know what they're doing. And then they can be like really easy to work with. Otherwise, I would focus my energy on founders that are more open to strategic thinking, right, outside of the base product.
I think that's really interesting, those two archetypes, and I hear that, and I agree with that. Particularly the kind of Steve Jobs archetype, because arguably, his level of control changed the whole industry to the point where it's now opened up other industries on the back of it. But I guess the question that's rolling around in my mind though is, when it comes to that control founder versus outcome founder, in your experience, what's been the relationship between those two types of founders in relation to their mindset? So, I guess one being arguably very abundant and growth mindset driven, i.e. the outcome driven person, because they're more flexible to see what is possible, versus the control might have a very scarcity and a very, controlling mindset, because they want it in this way, in that way, and that's how they see it. How have you felt and seen that type of mindset in those two types of founding archetypes, and what I guess has been some of the key challenges in dealing with that?
You actually make a really good point. I hadn't thought about it in terms of growth and scarcity, but that is pretty close to the experience. The primary challenge is that building a company is not smooth, right? It is not smooth, and it is. And I tell this to my team all the time. The Bambush team is quite large and very experienced, and I'm constantly reminding my own team, our role in the relationship with a founder is to be the mentor, right? We are not here just to take instruction. Otherwise, they'll just go to an agency. So founders predominantly, as a rule, are all afraid. Maybe all of us are afraid of something, right? But the fear sits with them. And the fear really is fear of running out of money, right? And if they're not afraid of running out of money, they're doing their job wrong. That's what a CEO's job essentially is, to make sure the company never runs out of money. So they have this constant fear. So sometimes that fear will manifest more strongly one way or the other. Right? If I will run out of money if I overspend, so they become very tight. I will run out of money if I don't generate more revenue, so they become very aggressive with trying to find more and more revenue, or more and more investment, and they just focus entirely on raising more and more money all the time. So all these things are driven by the fear of running out of money. So when it comes to the sitting down with someone and saying, right, here is our view on how your business should move forward from a brand perspective, or from a product development perspective, or from a legal and governance perspective, I touch all those things on a daily basis, and then some, because we have so many directors in the firm. If they are too controlling, that fear makes them tighten up and become more controlling, right? And then it becomes very difficult to get through to them, because of if we're suggesting a change that doesn't align with their already concrete views, it becomes very difficult to have that conversation. So yeah, it's tough, but it all stems from fear. So if you want to move forward, and I'm not saying this just I'm saying this to the listener from a perspective of, if you are a founder listening to this, or if you're somebody speaking to a founder, there's the same lesson is being learned. Understand that the problem is fear. The fear is not irrational, right? The fear of running out of money is not irrational. It is the single one thing that CEOs have to worry about. But if you allow fear to dictate how you run your business, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and your business will run out of money, right?
Yeah, I hear that.
So it's about making sure you're making the right decisions. And so when you're giving the advice to a founder, bear in mind they're afraid, and then make sure you service that part of the fear first, right? You deal with that problem. You agree that you put some security in place and say, well, okay, we know that this is going to be a risk, so how do we de-risk this? So you remove the fear from the conversation. And from a founder's perspective, understand that when you're hesitating, and when you find yourself stuck trying to make a decision, the problem is most likely fear. And it's that fear of running out of money. So tell yourself, how can I de-risk this? Right? How will I de-risk this situation right now, or the decision that I'm about to make, so that if it doesn't go the way I expect, then I have essentially some sort of stop loss on this, right? I have the ability to return the purchase, or to terminate the contracts of the people I'm hiring to do this thing. Whatever the decision you're about to make, there's probably some sort of expenditure or some sort of strategic risk. How are you going to mitigate that risk, right?
That's really interesting, and I absolutely agree on that. And even more so on that fear part, I think there's also a need for the actual founder in that particular instance to be willing to be humble enough to be self-aware of how they are reacting to their own fear, and how that informs their decision making. Because you might have a mentor, a coach, or even a member of your team, or even customers who will say to you, you're not doing this because of X, and you take that super personally. But really, that's just their experience with the manifestation of how you're operating from that personal place. And your personal approach to something manifested in an activity or a service or a product delivery. It's not it's not personal, but it's how it's being perceived on both sides. And the customer in that instance, for example, might see it as bad customer service, or see it as not getting their product on time, or whatever reason. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means the delivery of what you're doing isn't up to par. But many a founder will take it as it's like you told them something about their mother or father or something. They take it that personally. And I, even in my own experience, certainly as a non-technology founder who's grown a technology company, I had that fear of coming into that space, and I had to learn through support and through experience that you bring a different perspective into the space, because you don't have, or should I say, wasn't tainted by the rules of how to be a technologist, if that makes sense. It was very much around, well, what are you bringing in that gives you a different lens on the technology space and where you can add value to people in it. And that was quite an interesting journey for me and the evolution of character in that regard. But I guess it brings me on to another point that you made there in terms of, I guess, the alluding to kind of support of those who are helping the founders who have the fear, and I guess the recognition of their own sense of vulnerability in terms of how do they feel super equipped to deal with that person who has the fear? And as Bamboo Orchard and as in the organization that you run and the way that you work with founders, how have you managed your own challenges in dealing with those particular founders who have been going through that journey themselves in terms of understanding themselves, understanding what they need to do, and as you say, that mentoring approach to work? How have you dealt with yourself in that regard?
So Bamboo Orchard is definitely an execution business more than it is an advisory business, which means that already we're reducing that sense of fear by being in the trenches. The term sounds a bit strange, but being actually in the work side by side with the founders and the team. Some of the companies we work with, it's just 1, 2, or 3 founders and nothing else. All the other parts of the business are our staff. We'll run the marketing department and the finance department, the legal department, the product software development, and branding, everything. We'll run all the departments. That's probably maybe 20 or 30% of our companies will be like that. But some of the companies we work with have hundreds of employees and do millions of revenue. And we are just coming in to do one thing. We're running the HR department, or we're running their legal and governance, or something like that. And so we'll go in and sit in with that business. But no matter what we're doing, we're essentially a director level person sitting down in the business and sitting with the CEO and giving them insight on their business, not just from, well, I'm a management consultant coming in from the outside and I've had a snapshot view of your business from 1,000 feet and then I'm giving you my report, right? This is, we work every day in your business. We're running this department or building this side project or whatever it is we're doing for that business. I'm talking about the larger businesses. For the smaller businesses, we're literally everywhere, right? And from our position, we can give you this detail, and we're giving you detail as if we're a person in your business, but from the tone of voice, if you like, of somebody who is a third party. So I'm not beholden to you as my employer, because I have no fear of like being honest because you're my CEO. I am coming to you as an advisor. I have that advisor sort of positioning, but I also work in your business every day, so I can give you that advice. And also, I work in other businesses similar to yours throughout the week and throughout the recent years, so I can give you the advice from, by the way, I've seen this happen before, and this is how it was solved in that other situation. So you can then apply that here. And you asked another question in terms of how do we sort of reduce the fear in general. Keeping things simple is just really, really good practice, no matter what you're doing, right? And in business, as well as any other situation, the fundamentals are more important than anything else. This desire from founders to sort of find the hack to solve a problem and to do the very creative new thing, it has a place, but you cannot build a business on hacks. You have to build the hacks on the foundations of a business.
100%.
Right? And that's how we essentially make sure that everyone feels comfortable and confident, because when you build all the strong foundational work, then you have way more confidence and way less fear around, can we take this risk? Well, yes, because all the foundations are in place. So what's the worst case scenario? We're only falling back to our foundations again. When you're building on a risk, when your risk is sitting on top of no foundation, then zero is the stop loss when you're falling down from that point.
It's like trying to build a house with build a house on quicksand. You know what I mean? Like the foundations are not right. It doesn't matter how wonderful the house is. Ultimately, at some point, it is going to crumble because it's weakened from its inception.
I have a simplified. I've distilled my experience with these. What do we say? Almost 100 companies now. I've distilled my experience and I've into sort of one concept. Fun enough, I was actually asked about this recently, which is why it's fresh in my mind. And I said to the person who asked me this that the primary thing that you need to worry about is that the brand of your business acquires customers, the product itself grows the revenue, the customer service grows referrals, and your pricing is the lever that you pull when you fail at one of the other three. Right? And those things,
right there, Adib.
and those things are the fundamental. That's your foundation. That's the foundation of your business, right? So the most important department at Bamboo Orchard is our branding department. Yeah. That's our most important department because without customers you have nothing, and without brand you have no customers. And this is one of the first hurdles I usually hit with founders. It doesn't matter if the company is, some of our largest companies, as I said, have hundreds of employees. It doesn't matter if it's a multi-hundred employee business or it's a brand new startup with a brand new idea that's come in through our doors. This brand conversation can either be, yes, I totally get it. Brand is fundamentally important, which is maybe 25% of the time, and 75% of the time is that important? Do people really care about brand? And I think when people are confusing brand with logos, that's maybe where they start to question whether the brand is important. But branding is about your identity, right? It's your perception, it's your credibility. And I think that's probably the most important thing. It's your credibility, right? And if you mix credibility and loyalty, you have brand.
Right, yeah. That's a gem right there, particularly in today's economy and world where there's so much noise from every quarter. The ability to cut through that with a very clear, strong brand that people can identify with, that's going to be the kind of the leverage to everything else in many ways, as you stated. And I think, I definitely hear that, particularly when at the moment there seems to be this wave of people driving their personal brand, and you got X, Y, and Z telling you how to create your personal brand. There's everyone talking about they're doing this, that, and the third. And I have, everyone has their own journey. They do their own thing. But I always ask, what's the evidence base? What's the impact of that? And I don't want to hear that from you. Mm-hmm. Who are your customers who are talking about you before I even know who you are? What is the ecosystem 2-3 layers down? What do they think about you? Particularly, as I say, my day-to-day is in the fintech space. And when I'm talking to finance providers and lenders and investors around how they're approaching organizations that they want to work with, there's almost this kind of sense of privilege that, well, we've got the money, so they need to come to us. And I kind of think that's almost, it's right to a point, but I think there's a shift happening because arguably there's so much more options out there because people are making a lot more noise, although you need to do your DD and all these different noises, but there's a lot more noise. I almost think, well, who's the customer today? Are the finance providers the actual recruiters of value or providers of value? Who's the actual customer of today? Because your brand speaks everything. Particularly from your banking days, but the traditional, dare I say, conservative nature of financial services historically has been completely upended by the digital revolution. And so how they position themselves without losing their heritage that's got them to that point is quite an interesting and delicate balance that they have to maintain.
You are seeing the high street banks over the last 10 years really sort of, I would say backpedaling, but maybe they're forward pedaling to try and make themselves relevant in a world where you have all these really sharp new brands coming into the world that are attracting some of the sort of long-term customers of banking, which is the, let's say, 35 to 65-year-olds, right? Plus, right? They're attracting some of that business, but they're hoovering up all of the 15 to 35-year-olds that are coming either newly into the banking space or are already very malleable because they haven't really been attached to their bank very long. And why they have, even if they have been with their bank for 10 years, it's just a bank account, right? It's meaningless and they have no attachment to that brand. And banks have relied on the fact up until now that switching bank accounts was, I say up until now, I mean up until about probably a decade ago, switching bank accounts was a bit of a pain. It was unnecessary. Banking in general was commoditized. They were all much for muchness. As soon as somebody comes in and sort of shakes the tree very slightly, doesn't even have to do a lot in terms of the actual product they're offering. They just have to uplift the brand. Suddenly you're seeing a change. You see the power of brand immediately. That doesn't mean you can rely entirely on brand. As I said, you can't. You have to have those three things. You have to have brand. You have to have product. You have to have service. If you get those three things, you can charge whatever you want, whatever you like, right? And that is if you look at the most prestigious businesses, I was going to say brands second. If you look at the most significant businesses in the markets, the likes of LVMH and Apple and whoever it might be, right? These brands have these companies, have exceptional brands. Yep. They have exceptional products. They wouldn't be where they were without exceptional products, and they have exceptional service, right? And that's why they can charge whatever they like, and people will pay. 100%.
Yeah. Totally hear that. Again, seeing that in the SME market, practically from where we are, we're seeing that, and the numbers are saying it in terms of that shift away from traditional financing into digital specialist and challenger banking. 60% of SMEs have moved to a non-traditional banking organisation because these organisations have strong brands. They are having great products that are tailored to their needs, and the service is kind of top notch. In the main, obviously, automation plays a huge part in the type of service provision that's provided these days. But it's quite interesting. So I kind of want to move back into kind of Bamboo Orchard a little bit in terms of I guess some of the successes that you've had in terms of the business that you've supported. I mean, if any kind of cases that come to mind of organisations who maybe coming in one way, you've supported them, they've gone on to achieve some extraordinary things. Have you got any examples of that?
I guess the measure of success is specific on the business. One thing that Bamboo Orchard has always been about is building good, solid businesses, right? Although we've changed our tagline as a brand, we do a rebrand ourselves every 2 years. We'll go through a rebranding process. We used to be, one of the things we used to say, which is I think remained true even if we don't say it directly on the website anymore, is that we build real businesses, and what we mean by that is that everything has to be a direct line to profit. Right, because if you're not profitable, you're not a business, really. You're not generating profit. Right? Yeah. So the definition of success, I think, is dependent on what your goals are. Right. For some companies, that is, we want to be a $1 billion unicorn, right? And there's a couple of generating a unicorn in 6 years is quite difficult. But some of the earlier companies that I worked on, the earliest one that I can think of that was in the fintech space, same as yourself, was a company called Chip Financial. This still exists, and they're doing very well. And that is an example of a company that's definitely on the path to that unicorn figure. But I'd say the vast majority of businesses in the world, including in Bamboo Orchard, are very much on a path to something million or tens of millions, and not on the path to hundreds of millions. I'd say most of the founders that I work with, if I was to offer them today a check for 10 million and say, right, you're done with your business, here's 10 million for your work, I'd say most of them would take that and say, great, I've got 10 million to work on my next project, right? So yeah, we're very much focused on what the founders are looking for in terms of their outcomes.
I think that's a right way to do it as well.
We've had some very, very cool things. I've always a recency bias. So the most recent companies are the ones that are sitting in your mind rather than the ones from a long time ago. And there's a few we're working on right now which are really quite something. I think the most exciting, simply because the market is so large and they're really sort of changing lives, is a company called PH7. PH7 is essentially Europe's, I want to say first, but the market is still very nascent, so it seems a little bit silly to say the first, but they are essentially the early company that is bringing medical cannabis delivered to homes in Europe. They've started already in Portugal. The UK if it hasn't launched yet, it's about to. I think I'm questioning because I think we're a few days away from that being true.
Exciting.
And it is literally just the ability for people to have access to a medication that is widely needed, hard to get access to, simply because there is still a feeling in the market amongst the medical industry that, hold on, should we be doing this? When did it become legal? A lot of people in Europe don't even know that it's legal to have cannabis from a pharmacy, and so essentially we just arrange the delivery from the pharmacy. So that business is super interesting from a impact perspective. It's interesting, as I've just described, but also from a business perspective, the ability to have that high reoccurring customer base, a nice solid brand with good loyalty around it, a product and service that people will resonate with. And if you can nail that, you're essentially doing Uber Eats for cannabis, right? Yeah. And that is a very appealing prospect. Even as an investor, I look at that as a very appealing prospect. It's a company that I've personally invested in as well. So that's probably the most exciting one that I've worked on this week. This week. But if we sat down for long enough, I've got some really interesting things. We're doing some really interesting things with AI at the moment. I've been working on AI companies since 2014. Wow. So to me, it's not a new concept. But what you can do now with LLM technology, that 10 years ago I was working with things like genetic algorithms that were way more cumbersome than what the world has now. So what we can do now is really quite amazing. And we've launched new products in the legal space, in the medical space. It's really, really interesting at the moment. I for another conversation another day, the world will be very, very different by the end of 2027. We will be technology and software companies will not be what we see today.
And look, that could be a whole other podcast series in itself, because I had a conversation with some people last week before. We're talking about kind of the future of business and what it really is going to mean. And by the end of it, no one could have a definitive answer, because technology in itself has affected every single industry. But the pace of that affection now across all those different sectors is becoming faster as well. So, what was the same even last week could be different depending on what sector you're in and what you're doing.
Yeah. The event horizon for us is something like 2027. We're doubling in intelligence at the moment every 5 or 6 months, and once we're able to allow AI to self-develop without human interaction, you remove the bottleneck, which is humans being slow, and the AI can just develop itself. Even if it's doing it badly, it will be able to iterate so quickly that it will be able to sort of throw away the poor versions of itself and keep pulling out and only allowing the best versions of itself to rise up. So even if it's not efficient, it will still be so much faster.
Yeah, 100%.
That we'll be doubling intelligence every 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, every 2 weeks. And at that point, and when you hit that point, which it's probably going to be around 2026, 2027, then we have no idea what happens next.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of singularity style event horizon where we just have no visibility. And to have it just 2 years away is such a weird thing. It's such a weird thing because we're used to, as human beings, where the pace of change is so slow, we can see 20, 30, 40 years in front. We can do these predictions in that kind of distance. Yeah. We can't at the moment. No one can predict what's going to happen beyond that point.
That's why I guess, again, going back to your earlier point about the foundational pillars, if you like, of a business, that's the only thing you could potentially control, really, at that point. But to a point, because iterations may come on how those foundations are built and constructed, and evolutionary versions of those. Who knows?
We're actually moving we're changing our focus and on the sort of to diversify our portfolio. We're moving back into experiential businesses, something that I thought I wouldn't go back to because it's an industry I left in 2009. Although I've had a couple of different businesses sort of in our portfolio. We had two in the last 10 years. I really stopped in that industry in 2009. What I mean by experiential businesses, I mean hospitality. I mean the theatre, the hotels, restaurants, members clubs, cocktail bars, places where people go and have experiences, and not just a place to buy a drink or have a meal. Somewhere where you will go and do more than that, because that will start being more important to people. How can I experience the world and experience something new?
You're talking on point there, Adib, because if you look at, so I was saying with my son, just over the weekend actually, he's 24, so he was talking about going out with his mates and whatever, and I said, so where do you guys go out these days? Trying to sound like the kind of cool dad who's not that old, but obviously a lot older than my son, and he was saying, well, they were going out to some place that didn't serve alcohol, which is fine, which is great, but specifically didn't serve alcohol, and where they could play, I think it was indoor football or something they were looking to do, like these simulation games, and they went out, and I think they went out for about 6-7 hours in this place, and I thought to myself, it's a good thing. I mean, I'm not, goes out, he's old enough to drink, it's fine, he can do what he wants to do with his friends. But it was this whole sense of, we want to go to a place where we're having social time, experiencing and having fun. Not like when we were that young, where you want to go out and it's a full night out and you're looking to get food and drinks and in a club or whatever. It was like, no, we just want to chill out, sit down, have some fries, have a burger, play a bit of football simulation, map it against our fantasy football league app on our phones. And it was that type of energy. And I was like, that is experiential. And then when you think about, and it got me thinking about where people go out these days, it's very much socially driven. There's a lot more, you've got the F1 racing bars, you've got indoor golfing bars, you've got indoor football bars, there's experiences, everything. And then
thematic venues are becoming popular
hugely,
very, very quickly. Yeah.
Hugely, and there's a fund that I'm aware of, entertainment fund, that are looking to invest heavily in that space as well, across the world, in terms of some of your more popular TV shows, kids shows, turn them into kind of kids cafes and things like that based on those shows and all those types of things. It's like, so you're absolutely right in that move is the right way.
It's funny, actually, I had a recent conversation with somebody, the founder of one of these experiential businesses, where they were talking about investment coming from TV and movie studios who don't know what to. They want to diversify, and they're like, we think it needs to be a physical thing, not just another thing for the screen. And they're looking at those exact same things.
Yeah. And if you look at even like the Harry Potter type things, and there's Harry Potter Studios, which is there. There's experiential experiences is so key. What I think is going to be really interesting is when that really impacts the luxury market more than ever before. There's a thing around going out to have luxury holidays and luxury experiences, but I've seen a kind of shift away from the the standard, champagne luxury. It's experience luxury. It's doing something in a different place that we never thought we would do. And the memory of that's what's luxury, not the
I
external
have,
materialistic. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean?
I have literally just come back from Colombia, and I didn't book any of the hotels. Actually, my girlfriend did, but she used to work for LVMH, and she has worked for some significant brands, including Christian Dior. So she comes from a luxury background, and she booked very expensive places, and they were essentially tents. It was camping in the jungle in Colombia, but with the most incredible views over the sides of mountains and canopies. And in one sense, they are absolute luxury. The service, you're getting this luxury service,
You
but
still got standard,
it's not white marble hotels with swimming pools. It's camping in the jungle, with a beautiful bed and a beautiful view and wonderful cocktails, but it's still very basic and very approachable. But the price, you'd think you were staying in a 5-star hotel.
Yeah. And that's only going to increase. So it's going to be interesting where the role of technology comes into the physical experiences that people will be searching for, wanting to have, and the memories that will give them, and where these two worlds will align. But interesting times ahead. So just as we're coming to kind of close a little bit, one of the things that we really want to help our viewers to get is, I guess, a bit of a gem and a bit of an insight to yourself in terms of, I guess, a closing thought perhaps on your experience to date, where you are, maybe your view of the future. So I just wonder if you had a bit of a closing thought on that you'd like to share. Could be personal, could be professional, completely up to yourself, but a closing thought.
Oh, that's if you just asked me for a professional one, I could have given you something really
too easy.
really straightforward. Now you've thrown a spanner in the
quite a
works.
deep person when you want to be, Adib, so I just thought I'd give you that flexibility to decide.
I had I'm gonna give you something that I didn't expect to share, and it's that I think that people underestimate what they're capable of. And I have spent my whole life being told that something shouldn't be or isn't possible, and then gone and done it anyway. So
100%.
Well, I think probably I was inspired by my father. Even going to university at the age of 16, my father went to the university when he was 15.
Wow.
So when you have a role model who didn't listen to the world and just carried on, did whatever he wanted to do.
There's only one route from there, mate.
Exactly. No matter what I do, I will never have done as much as my father did. So I think that people don't really understand what they're capable of, and I see it frequently in two places, because they're two places that are important to me, not because they're the most common places. Maybe they are the most common places, but they're the place that I look at the most. One is in business, and the number of founders I see that falter because they don't understand that actually building good businesses is really straightforward. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is simple. It is simple. And if you do the simple things, you will build your business to a level which is going to satisfy you. And for some people, that will be 5 million a year in revenue. For others, it's 50, and for others, it's 500, right? And on the other side, the other place I see it, which is what makes me understand the human condition, is in fitness. I am an amateur athlete, if you like. I have a VO2 max in the top 2% of people in the world, right? At the age of 45, and I mean the entire population, right? So when people turn around to me and say, as a 45-year-old, I am not going to be able to, run a marathon every week or do all of the complex and strenuous sports that I do. I do a lot of different things, right? I've recently discovered something called Hyrox, which is built perfectly for me. It's one of the most complex, grueling pseudo triathlon, pseudo half marathon type sports that I've come across before. I've usually done really straightforward traditional things, rock climbing and skiing and cycling and running. Right. This is kind of like an amalgamation of everything. And the number of people that say, "Well, I could never do that," and they look at me and they go and they assume that because I'm so fit at 45, I must have been doing this my whole life. I had no interest in sport before I was 30. So I think I just like being told, but I like surprising people. So when I was really young, I just surprised people by getting into different high-level positions in businesses very, very early, or developing my own companies very, very early. And people were like, "Oh, wow, how did you achieve so much so young?" And then as I got older, people stopped saying that. And so I needed something else for people to pat me on the back for. So I got into sport, I think. And then suddenly in my 30s, people are like, "How are you so fit as a 30-something? And how are you so fit as a 40-something?" So I think people just don't know what they're capable of. So my takeaway is the ability to become exceptional at something is not as hard as you think it is. And you can achieve exceptional things in short periods of time. And by short, I mean a year. And I would set anyone the challenge of, within a year, trying to become exceptional at something, right? Trying to get into the top 20% of the world at a thing, or building a business that would put itself in the top X in a year, 12 months. You only need to invest in 12 months into something. And if you put enough time and get enough support, coaching in the physical sense or in the business sense, the same is true. If you have the right time and the right coaching, you will achieve exceptional things inside of a year, things you couldn't believe that you could achieve.
No, that's so inspirational, bro. For many reasons, I didn't expect to say this to myself either, but a lot of what you just said in terms of your father really resonates with my own self as well. And that my father owned Europe's largest nightclub in the 80s. And as a black man running an entertainment centre for the UK and Europe, we faced a lot of challenges left, right, and centre around that. But I'm 45 as well. So in the early days of that, I didn't really experience it. I was too young. But in my teenage years, I got the gist of what it meant to see that type of lifestyle, but not be living in it, because I was living with mom. So they weren't together, but they were still friends, and my dad was around, but they weren't in the same home. And I remember being so inspired by seeing that whole lifestyle, and then going back to the reality day in, day out, and living a complete contrast. But understanding that the more I experienced both sides of my parents, is the more it made me realize that nothing's impossible. It's just more about the decisions that you make and your commitment and your drive to make those things happen. And, I started off saying that, just obviously researching you and understanding a little bit about you prior to the podcast, there's a sense of relentlessness about how you've been and the success that you've had and are having and will continue to have. But I thank you for sharing, being open about sharing, I guess, some of the origins of that, and that really resonates with some of my own experiences in different ways too, and I'm sure with many of the viewers of this podcast as well, in terms of that level of self-belief and being willing to accept support to deliver on that, even when you can't always see how in yourself, is very, very key and very, very important. But not being afraid to be the rebel as well. When you're seeing the norm and you're seeing tradition, like, get it, like, be that rebel, because you can be a rebel in a positive way. It's not about this notion of doing wrong and anarchy. It's about, why not change the status quo if you're doing it for the value of the masses or the value of others, the benefit of others. And it's okay to give yourself the permission to do that. sometimes it's not about permission, it's about just doing it anyway, because who else is going to do it? And that's personal choice of whatever the circumstance for the individual. But I truly respect, your journey and all the value that you are now manifesting for other people through that journey. It's very, very commendable, and I'm sure our listeners and our viewers will see that and want to get engaged. And I guess as a final question, really, I guess what will they get from getting in contact with you through OpenIntro? Is I guess the question.
At a really straightforward level, I've seen so many problems, and I have so much pattern recognition in the startup to scale up space. The sort of 0 to 200 employee, that run I've done pushed over and over and over again. And that's the kind of the base of it. And because I have run brand marketing departments, and I have been an engineer and run engineering departments, and I have worked alongside lawyers and accountants, CFOs, and run operations, there isn't really much in the core foundational parts of a business that I won't be able to understand. And that's really why most people come to me. They want to get a bird's eye holistic view, somebody who's going to not just come with a hammer, and will come with a whole sort of tool set, right? On the sort of more holistic side, I want to help people achieve what they're trying to achieve, right? It's the only reason I do what I do, and I have no real. I've already done so much in my life and my career. At this point, I've slowed right down. I am not a hustler. It's not my style. I'm very disciplined, but I wouldn't describe myself as a hustler. I am more interested in bringing joy into my life and the people around me. And if that means supporting founders to work out where they're going with their life and what they want to do with it. I've had founders call me and ask me for advice on their marriages, not even their businesses, right? So it is. I do see myself as kind of like the guide, the mentor, and I have my own guides, my own mentors that I go to when I want. So I want to be able to replicate the value I get from them with the people that I deal with.
Excellent. That's awesome. Well, Adib, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights, your leadership, your honesty, your candor, and wish you and Bamboo Orchard every success in this next phase of the journey and going on to support many more hundreds and thousands of businesses out here in the ecosystem. So thanks again for your time, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Joe.